Okay, I think okay, my stream was acting. That's what it was. But with that being said, is my stream working? Give me a second. But with that being but okay, yes. Sorry about that. My stream went off for a second. But yes, back to the if Rhaenyra keeps listening to Rhaenys, she's going to lose her throne. You shouldn't listen to Rhaenys because she doesn't have what it takes to actually be queen, honestly. Even though her throne was taken from her, she's showing with what her in with her and idolizing her grandfather who was the great conciliator. She doesn't have what it takes to actually fight for what needs to be done. But moving on from Rhaenys, and hopefully Rhaenyra doesn't follow her. Well, we see how the episode ended. We know even though she's following Rhaenys' guidance, her counsel, and she's talking to Alicent, trying to find another way around it. Alicent makes her mark known, and we move on, and we see that Criston Cole is now the leader of the Kingsguard. He was always the leader of the Kingsguard, but now we see Sir Criston Cole in his first official day as the Hand of the King, and he knows he's way over his head. He knows that, but nonetheless, that's the duty. That's what happens to him. He falls upwards, but with him falling upwards, he knows he's overwhelmed, but it's also giving him a little pep in his step. It's also giving him the satisfaction of he feels as though he's an equal. Because we see now in the council meeting, him actively disagreeing with Alicent when before he couldn't do that because he was a member of the Kingsguard and he had no place. So he's wearing his power strong on his shoulders. But it's not just that. We see that the High Towers themselves, are taking over everything. They're even changing the old Targaryen banners and they're making them into the new golden dragons with the green with the gold sigil of the dragon. They're making it more High Tower-ish when Targaryen historically is black with the red dragon, the three-headed dragon. But because of their High Tower influence, you can see where they're losing the House of the Dragon in this very show. And not just that, Aegon is in way over his head. Not Aemon, Aegon. There he is. Aegon is now king, and we see Aegon is in way over his head. He doesn't know the first thing about ruling. He actually wants to go on the forefront and it's not just that. Like, he was actually going to go into battle. He even appointed new Kingsguard. We see how he's deteriorating the crown. We see how Aegon is picking up these new members of the Kingsguard. Granted, Criston Cole isn't the best at leading by example, but these guys openly and blatantly are breaking their oaths. And Aegon would rather go drinking with his buddies because it makes him seem stronger by staying in King's Landing. That's what Larys ended up telling him, and he ends up making Larys his master of whispers. Viserys never needed that because he ran a clean court. Granted, Viserys himself wasn't the strong king, but because of his ways, his court was trustworthy, and there wasn't really anyone trying to snake Viserys. He had the House of the Dragon united. Daemon was his muscle, and Otto, for everything that Otto was making sure that the council stayed clean. So now that Aegon is falling into depravity, he enlists Larys as his master of whispers, and he starts to hear rumors. He's taking his army. Kristen Cole is mounting their army and going to Harrenhal. And we're going to talk about Harrenhal because that's also where Daemon is. And Daemon got some nasty foreshadowing earlier. And now we're really starting to see the two armies move against each other. Rhaenyra doesn't have an army. Alicent made that blatantly clear in the end of the episode. But Rhaenyra has the most seasoned dragon rider. And what did Daemon do? Daemon himself went to Harrenhal. By listening to Larys and not going with Aegon, and by not sending Aemon so they can defend King's Landing, they sent Kristen Cole without a dragon to take Harrenhal. Daemon doesn't have an army, but he does have a dragon. And we start to see where the battles are and the lines are being drawn for the coming battle. That's why I said this episode is also most likely the final peaceful episode this season, because now all the pieces are in place. And that's when Daemon is introduced. Daemon is here and he makes his way to Harrenhal. And that's when we really start to see the fruits of what he's been doing the past few days. Because remember, Daemon left. No one knows where he is. He's not communicating with Rhaenyra. And for all intents and purposes, he's AWOL. But he's actually showing his allegiance by going to Harrenhal and taking the biggest castle in the kingdom to round up an army for her. That's what he told her when him and her were having that disagreement last episode. He's trying to raise an army in her name, and he's doing so by flying to Harrenhal, by taking the castle. Granted, as intense as this scene was, with Daemon slinking through the castle, he knocked out one guard, and we come to find out Harrenhal, for the most part, is abandoned, and no one cares about it because it is a burned down castle. It's in disrepair because since Aegon the Conqueror came with Balerion and conquered that castle and burnt it to the ground, well, not to the ground as it's still standing, it's just been cursed. Larys ended up killing his father and his brother in that same castle. We see what happens when Arya is in that castle and a man who has no name ended up taking 3 people off her list. The castle itself is cursed, and anyone who inhabits it is doomed to cursed. And that's what happens with Daemon. So after he ends up reluctantly trusting the host of the castle, he goes to bed and he starts hallucinating of young Rhaenyra and the tragedies that he's doing. But it's really Daemon touching the God's wood and being in touch with his spirituality. We know that the Targaryens have magic in their blood. That's how they're able to fly dragons. And we know the God's wood connects you to a mystical power, the power of old, the power of the old gods. And that's why Bran was able to first develop his powers. So with Daemon touching that, he's able to see his faith. And it's telling him that he is going to die in Harrenhal Castle. So now that leads us to wonder, how is that going to happen? Because if Daemon is there and he has his dragon, Caraxes, and we're reminded of just how menacing Caraxes is, Christian Cole does have an army, but how is Daemon going to die there? Unless what they were talking about before, sending a dragon to assist him. And not just that, we can jump to Aemon Targaryen and really see that with Aemon, he has something to prove. He was embarrassed this episode. Aegon embarrassed him. This relationship between Aemon and Aegon is a tense one, because Aegon was getting dressed in the armor of Aegon the Conqueror. But we know Aegon is no warrior, he's no conqueror, and ultimately Aegon shouldn't even be king, and everyone knows it. So when they advised them against going out, he takes his king guard and goes drinking. Not just drinking, he goes partying, he goes there's a war in his name. There is a war for Aegon's throne, and instead of defending it, he's out drinking, partying with his king's guard, breaking their vows, trying to break the virginity of one of his new recruits, one of their new knights. And you just start to see the Greens are doomed. The moment they fired Otto Hightower, it was over for them. Because at this point, who's running them? Christian Cole, who almost died this episode? And we're going to get into that because that might be my favorite scene in this entire episode, but we're going to get into Baela. But Aegon embarrassed Aemon. Aemon went back to the woman that he always goes for comfort, and that's when he's caught and embarrassed. And Aegon talks cash shit because ultimately Aegon is king. Aemon can't say, or if Aemon were to do anything right then and there, he'd be arrested and killed because Aemon is also already known as the Kinslayer, even though they're at war. And we see when Aegon walks into the bar, some people still believe in Rhaenyra. Some people believe her as the one true queen, and they believe Aegon is the usurper. And not just that, Aemon is a Kinslayer. Joffrey Velaryon was his nephew, his sister's kid, and he killed him to start the war and usurp the throne. So if he actually stood up against Aegon, so he can't do anything. Aegon can run amok and do whatever he wants, and Aemon ultimately can't do anything. The Greens are in disarray. Otto Hightower is no longer there. Christian Cole is in the front lines. King's Landing is left with the, what do I call them? The the Hightower, the Golden Dragons. The Greens, the Golden Dragons are left. The Targaryen Hightowers and Alicent are left. And it's almost as though Rhaenyra just has to take the castle. If Rhaenyra actually goes there and takes it, nothing can stop Rhaenyra from being queen. Which I'm going to get into at the end of the episode as well, because I do want to talk about that final scene and just how the Blacks are really, I don't think they want the throne as much as they say they do. Because if they did, Aegon lives there. Aemon lives there. Not only has Rhaenyra and Daemon both snuck into King's Landing, they could have snuck some other assassins in there. If Rhaenyra, they could, the White Worm even says it herself. She could get Alicent killed easier than it would take for her to have a meeting with Rhaenyra. So the Greens really are at the beck and mercy of the true Targaryens. If Rhaenyra listens to Daemon and acts like a Targaryen, listens to her war council and moves on dragons, on Dragonback, they could take this. They've snuck into King's Landing twice at this point. They are more seasoned. Daemon is taking Harrenhal by himself. I just feel like the Blacks are holding themselves back. And realistically, we need to have a dialogue about Rhaenys. If we take it back to the first season, Rhaenys could have eviscerated the Hightowers right then and there. She chose not to act. What happens then? Rhaenyra's throne gets usurped. Lucerys dies. Now they're at war. Daemon told her in the first episode of this season, get back on Meleys. Let's go to King's Landing right now and take down Vhagar. Without Vhagar, the Blacks have an easy road to get to the Iron Throne. But no, she doesn't act then. In this week's episode, she's counseling Rhaenyra for restraint yet again. While she is Team Black, I feel like deep down, Rhaenys may have some resentment towards Rhaenyra, because if Rhaenyra sits on the Iron Throne, ultimately we knew in the first season, Rhaenys always hated on her. And even though now she doesn't mind it, it's as though she's actively working against Rhaenyra and stopping her true Targaryen essence. And maybe that's why she never sat on the Iron Throne, because even though she rides a dragon, she's not fully a dragon. She doesn't embrace her dragon side. Because if she did, it's dragon time. Let's go jump them. Even Rhaenyra wants to succumb to her Targaryen bloodline. And just, we're at war. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's war. And yet she's saying, restrain yourself. I don't know. I think Rhaenys is the one holding these characters back. And that brings us to her and Corlys, which is going to bring us realistically to Corlys's bastard sons, because now Corlys is thinking about his lineage. Now Corlys is thinking about who's going to sit on his throne of Driftmark. I remember I said that in my last week's live stream. Corlys wants his bloodline at this point. He doesn't want the... At first, he was okay with Lucerys Valerion sitting on the Iron Throne when we thought Rhaenyra was going to be queen and everything was up for validity, or everything was reinforced by the crown. But now that they're talking about lineages coming up to factor, and he knows they're bastards, he's talking about his own kids and his own lineage, and Rhaenys is talking about putting his granddaughter Rhaena on the throne. And like I spoke about last week when it comes to Rhaena, the reason why Rhaena isn't, and he doesn't want her on the throne, is because Rhaena is a woman, and not because she's a woman, she's inherently less than to rule. It's because she's going to marry somebody and end up taking that person's last name, and that person is going to be the one who inherits Driftmark and Corlys's lineage. That's why he doesn't want to pass it on to her. Which brings us realistically to the theory I've been talking about all along, and it's all but confirmed at this point. And that's Alan and Adam are going to be the ones inheriting Driftmark. Because throughout this episode, not just the Corlys scene, when Rhaenyra is talking to the White Worm, we hear Sea Smoke crying. We hear him flying around and crying. And Sea Smoke is Laenor's dragon. The bond you have with your dragon is for life. That tells me Laenor Valerion is dead. Sea Snake is crying and grieving, and that's why he's able to form another bond, because Laenor has died in Essos. Laenor has been gone for what? How long has that been? Daemon and Rhaenyra have multiple kids. He's been gone for about 5 years now. The kids were young. Yes, he's been gone for about 5 years now. 5-6 years. So he's finally died, and now his dragon is ready to join one of them. And now Corlys's lineage is not up for grabs. You see what I said when I said Rhaenys was not a true dragon? Rhaenys is about to lose pretty much everything. Because think about it. Baela and Jace are not going to sit on the Iron Throne, because if they did, the Targaryen lineage would be brown hair and black people, which it's not. It goes back to white people with silver hair. So we know one of them sits on the Iron Throne. So her legacy doesn't pass on. If Corlys lets his bastard son and he legitimizes them, and they sit on the iron, they sit on Driftmark, not Rhaena or Baela's kids, Rhaenys' line of sitting at legacy is over. The queen that never was will have grandsires and descendants that never were either. All because she's not a pure dragon. All because she doesn't fight and take what she needs and take what she wants. And she preaches caution. Instead of going to war and letting your dragons, fire and blood is the theme of House Targaryen. And when you don't succumb to that, you lose. But speaking of Rhaena, Rhaena still doesn't have a dragon. Remember that was a plot point in season 1. Daemon loves Baela more than he loves Rhaena because Rhaena doesn't have a dragon. And not because she doesn't have a dragon, she's been tasked with babysitting Rhaenyra's kids. But that's not just something to take lightly. I don't think her role was diminished. You don't have a dragon. So because you don't have a dragon, you can't be here. You can't be at the front lines. It's dangerous. So take these kids, take dragon eggs, take the heirs to my throne if anything goes wrong. Continue our lineage. She is a full-blooded Valyrian. And not by Valerian, I mean Valerian. She's Mother Valerian, Father Targaryen. So are Rhaenyra's 2 youngest kids. So her role is super important because all of it in this machination of war, all of it matters. And that's why I like when Baela came to her and Baela gave her words of encouragement, because Baela knows it's not just about flying a dragon. Everyone has their duties. And I think Baela is the perfect princess, perfect queen to be, perfect everything in the sense of a Targaryen character. She is the embodiment of Targaryen. She understands duty. She understands Rhaena. You cannot fly a dragon. You don't have a dragon yet. Guard these dragon eggs. And those dragon eggs are going to end up in Essos. And we know those dragon eggs are going to be Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaegal, Daenerys' dragons. I like that Easter egg, and it was pointed in this episode. But Baela understands that. And because Baela understands that and she talks to Rhaena, Rhaena understands that. And because of that, because of doing your duty as a Targaryen, Daenerys has dragons, and the dragons can help against the Long Night, ultimately the Song of Fire and Ice. Because if you follow duty, everything will prevail. We do end up having a moment where we sit with the Alicent kids and we see it's a weird conversation between Alicent and Helena, where Helena gives Alicent forgiveness because ultimately Alicent blames herself for what she was doing at the time that Jaehaerys died. And we see that Helena is actually losing her sense of connection with the rest of the world. It's almost as though she's not connecting with her mom, where she gives Alicent absolution. And I think I'm gonna stop talking about Alicent until we get to the end and we have the conversation between her and Rhaenyra, because just Alicent's character, really, there is no redeeming quality for her. There's nothing really that makes Alicent an agreeable character in the slightest. But we get to my favorite part of this episode when Bayla sees Christian Cole and she's flying Moondragon and she pursues him. Bayla was this close to winning the war for the Blacks. And you see what I said about everyone playing their roles? Yes, she was there to survey and not attack. But she saw an opportunity and she tried to take it. Had she been a tad bit more aggressive, she would have caught him. I would have Dracarys the moment Moon Dancer swooped behind them. Burn whoever you can. If you get Christian Cole, they have no Hand of the King. Their army's in disarray. And you essentially have won the war. But we see Bayla is adept at using her dragon. Bayla, I feel like, has a bigger role to play. I feel like Bayla as a character, I said it earlier in the stream and I'll say it again, is the essence of what it is to be a Targaryen woman. She has the blood of the dragon flowing through her. She has the instincts. She has the dragon. She has the smarts and the wherewithal. And with that maneuver on Christian Cole, trying to single-handedly end the war, I mean, she's Daemon's daughter. No matter what this show does with Daemon, you can't make me hate him. And it runs in his DNA. Like, seriously. Bayla gets it from her father. She took her dragon and almost ended the war on her own. And that's something Daemon would have done. Which also brings us to Daemon again and the prophecy that he's not going to survive Harrenhal. We see that this season is approaching a battle at Harrenhal. We see that they're going to the Riverlands. Bayla surveilling the area with Dancer. Melees is going to be needed. We see Rhaenyra saying and looking at Rhaenys saying they're going to have to make a move. Aegon just embarrassed Aemon, and Aemon is going to make a move. Daemon and Caraxes are already there. We see everyone converging onto the Riverlands, converging onto Harrenhal, which makes what Bayla did that much better, because she could have ended it. Bayla took the initiative. She could have stopped the war from actually happening and going down, but we see everyone is on a collision course. And right now, the Blacks have no army. Because at the end of the episode, we know that Rhaenyra and Alicent have a conversation. The Blacks don't have an army, but they're moving strategically. They're moving smart with their dragons. They're moving like Aegon the Conqueror did. Without an army, Daemon was able to seize Harrenhal, and he's going to raise the bannermen. How is he going to get 40,000 men to fall in line? He's taking Caraxes. That's what he said. And once people see a dragon, they fall in line. Daemon's raising the army. Bayla almost ended Kristen Cole, almost ended the Hand of the King. Rhaena is persevering and saving the line. She left with 2 dragons, 4 dragon eggs, and 3 heirs to Rhaenyra's throne. We see, even though the Blacks' forces are small, Corlys is building his fleet. Like, they look like, I said last week, they looked like they were losing. They didn't have the moves. They were not making the right adjustments. But because of this missing Otto Hightower, in one season or one episode, you see how the Blacks have fallen apart. Not the Blacks, I mean the Greens. You see how the Greens have fallen apart. Aegon and Aemon are butting heads. Aemon can't say anything because Aegon's king and ultimately he could be tried for treason. But we see Aegon is not a conqueror. Aegon is not a smart king. Aegon is partying at this point. Aegon is actually drinking. His Kingsguard is in disarray. After what happened with Blood and Cheese, you would think he would reinforce the Kingsguard, but now he has even more lackadaisical guards. Kristen Cole almost died, and you can tell he keeps failing upwards, but he's no general. Kristen Cole is leading an army, and people aren't even following him in line. They almost died to a dragon. Without Otto Hightower, they're falling apart. Aemon was just embarrassed. So we know what happens when he's embarrassed. He does not let that go easily. So now he has to reclaim glory for himself. He's going to hit the battlefield. He's going to take Vhagar and do something stupid. Alicent ultimately had Rhaenyra in her sights. And in the final minutes of the episode, Alicent could have seized Rhaenyra right then and there. Alicent could have told the guard she's the moment Alicent said she did not make a mistake was the moment that she should have ended Rhaenyra and Rhaenyra's chat to. But let me take a few seconds or a few minutes and actually answer some of the chat questions. Let me see. Michelle LaBelle says, you're right. They should have just lived one time. They should have just moved one time. Yes, the Greens have Vhagar, but all of them Black Dragons could take Vhagar. Exactly. Especially what this episode is showing us with Aegon. It really would have been Aemon, because we see Helena, even with her dragon, she's a non-factor. Aegon is a non-factor. They would have won the world right then and there, that very moment. Even right now, if they fly to King's Landing, they can still win. But they're listening to Rhaenys, who isn't a true like I said, Rhaenys doesn't have the spirit of a Targaryen to actually lead them. And we have Ebony BGDD. Baela should have had her dragon blow fire on their asses. She's better than me. Exactly. I'm telling you, the moment I swooped down on my dragon and I could see them, I'm just yelling, Dracarys, we're gonna I'm burning that whole part of the forest down. It's Kristen Cole. We could the amount of damage she would have done to their army would have been insurmountable. Because realistically now, the Greens are in shambles. And Alicent reinforced the fact that I feel like Alicent always knew deep down that Viserys was not talking about Aegon. So when her and Rhaenyra met at the Great Sept and they were talking, and Rhaenyra actually told her she was mistaken. Rhaenyra cleared the air. She even said, did he say those words? The prince that was promised. It's a story about Aegon the Conqueror. And Alicent in that very moment knew she fucked up. But even then, her jealousy wouldn't let Rhaenyra have it. Even then, she was wrong yet again. But I will give her some credit. At this point, there's nothing Alicent can do. Aegon's already king, and you're telling Aegon to give up his throne? He'd be a laughing stock. Aemon is not doing that. And the cost, Rhaenyra still wants blood. Even though I do think Rhaenyra would have let Aemon live if that gave her the throne. But nonetheless, Alicent could have chosen a good side there. When Rhaenyra told her about the prince that was promised and that he was talking about Aegon the Conqueror, she knows Aegon's not a good king. She knows war's on the horizon. But it would give her a lesser standing than Rhaenyra. And we knew since the first season, Alicent has always been a hater. Alicent was never a true friend to Rhaenyra. And Rhaenyra is just, I feel like Rhaenyra is too nice when it comes to all of this. Like Rhaenyra, the Rhaenyra I know, and the Rhaenyra from the first season, the young Rhaenyra that we saw in this episode in the flashback with Daemon, she would have attacked. She would have went after and demanded her throne. I think it's because she's a mother and she's listening to Rhaenys and she's looking to be a good queen. She's going against her baser Targaryen instincts. She's more, at this point, a mixture of Daemon and Viserys. And we know Viserys, he's the reason all of this is happening. And they talk about Jaehaerys, the great conciliator, and how Rhaenys looks up to her grandfather. I mean, at that point, he had the only dragons in town. He had like 5 sons and they all had dragons. No one could stand against his might. So yes, he could be a conciliator. But let's not forget, in the histories of Westeros, Jaehaerys would never have been king if Maegor the Cruel could have a kid. When it came down to taking his throne, look how long it took. So even though Jaehaerys was a great conciliator, true Targaryens move on might. And it wasn't until he tried to move against Maegor that he became king. And that's why his reign lasted so long, because his entire armada, his entire family, Rhaenys, Daemon, Viserys, all his sons, every Targaryen dragon rider from his period was on his side. But Rhaenyra doesn't have that. And that's what Rhaenys doesn't understand. Rhaenyra doesn't have the support of the kingdom. So when the Targaryens don't have support of the kingdom, she said he ruled longer than Aegon the Conqueror. But Aegon ruled from nothing. When you don't have the support of the kingdom, you move on dragon power. But what's really interesting this episode, and like I said earlier, everything is setting up for the Blacks to make a full attack, because it's not nothing that they keep showing the Targaryen king and king consort and Queen Rhaenyra. I'm turning into the guy from Harrenhal who kept calling Daemon a prince. We know that the Blacks can enter King's Landing at any point. We know that the Blacks have the dragons. Daemon is taking Harrenhal. Baela is about that action. I think the Greens are about to suffer a lot more losses this season. It's not to say some of the Blacks aren't going to die, because obviously it's the Dance of the Dragons and a bunch of them are going to die. But I feel like it's theirs for the taking. I said this last week. The Blacks should be winning this war, and it doesn't feel like it. But this week's episode is the first episode where I start to see the pieces fall in place. Jace hasn't made a move yet. He's still with Rhaenyra. He has not made his move. Granted, Aemon and Aegon hasn't either. And of course, the great neutralizer, like I'm saying all of this, but ultimately the great neutralizer is Aemon. Because, I mean, he has Vhagar. Like, that's the biggest thing that, like, when it comes to these type of shows and these types of battles, the real problem comes when the real battles come when the nuclear weapons are at the forefront. Aegon has Sunfire, and Aegon is more than ready to use his dragon. But it's Aegon. He's not a real threat. The real problem comes when Aemon decides to make a move. When Aemon decides to get on Vhagar and start fucking shit up. We know Vhagar can eat full-grown dragon. Well, not full-grown because Luke's dragon wasn't full-grown. But we know Vhagar can eat dragons. So that's why the Greens get to be in disarray. And that's why you have to strike. Because even Alicent is afraid of what Aemon can do. Even Alicent doesn't know where he's going to go. But this episode really did not have I want to say this episode really did not have a lot to dive into and break down because it was a setup episode. It was a filler episode. It was moving all the chess pieces. The first 2 episodes was them setting the stage for everything. But now from this point forward, the rest of the episodes should increase and intensify. The sides are truly drawn. Alicent let it be known. There's no turning back now. It's just war from now on. Violence is going to ensue. The first dragon encounter almost happened with Bela and Moondancer. But from now on, it's full on war. But really, that's it for this week's episode. I mean, there isn't much to get into when it comes to the episode. And Team Black really needs to move. Team Green, on the other hand, also needs to make a move. So hopefully, this week's episode, I will say, was a lot slower. But like I said, I think it needs to be the final setup episode because I will say the show isn't moving at a pace where I thought it would be moving at. And it's kind of dragging, putting a lot of filler in. Granted, it's setting it up beautifully. But at this point, we need to see where the dominoes start falling. We need chessboards and chess pieces to move. The dance has to actually start dancing. It can't be about the dance of the dragons and we're just setting up the dance floor. That's just my thoughts. But guys, I think I'm going to call it with the live stream. Thanks for tuning in with me. Hopefully next week's episode is more dense and there's more to actually break down and spend more time talking. But if you like this video, check out some of my other House of the Dragon videos. Check out some other videos on the channel. And guys, until next week, peace.